most of us entrepreneurs, increasing your profitability is always on your mind. And you're probably looking for ways to increase your revenue while growing your company. Well, you found the podcast that shares ideas to help you do just that. I'm Marcia. I'm a business growth strategist. I've helped tons of small business owners to establish and implement a tangible plan that guarantees increased profitability and guides your growth. And it plans for a future exit. So building a profitable and sale-ready business creates a win-win scenario. That's more money for you now and a windfall when it's time to let go. And I want to share strategies that I've learned with you on today's Profit with a Plan podcast. But before we get started, I have some exciting news to share. I've released my second book called The Profit Accelerator, and I'm looking for a few business owners to interview on how my book's 12 strategies would impact your industry. Go download my book and let me know if you'd like to be interviewed. It's available for free only for the next few weeks while I'm interviewing business owners. I am so confident that these strategies can help any business increase their revenue, profit, and the value of the company without having to pay for additional advertising or marketing. Go pick up your copy at trajectoryprofits.com/book-download. All right, guys, I'm excited to have my guest on today, John Mink. John has over 30 years of business experience, and John has found much success in breaking down the traditional organizational barriers that divide functions and people within the companies that impede success. Through trial and error and continuous learning, he's found that he was able to shepherd both large and small organizations alike in driving improvements to their sales and operations processes, boosting both customer experience and financial results. There are many professionals that understand the science behind S&OP, which is sales and operating process, yet lack the interpersonal and leadership skills to drive sustainable results. In his book, Forecasting with Outliers, he attempts to change the narrative around the supply chain issues through real-life experiences and how they were addressed. And so John has had many, many years of experience through large companies like Motorola, Brightstar, Zebra Technologies, and Orca, and has just joined on with Hydroforce. So John has been around the block a couple of times. He's got a lot of experience. John, we're so happy to have you on Profit with a Plan podcast.
Thank you, Marcia. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, I ask this question to everybody. When we come into our careers, there's always something that triggered it. What triggered you to come into the business and forecasting the way you have?
That's a pretty funny story. It's mostly due to my bad temper that got me here. So through my career, I came in as a product marketing manager. So point where I'll give you my age, right? I was a product manager for bag phones and brick phones in the early days of cellular.
The big ones, right?
Star
Carry the
Trek,
bag.
the other thing, and so been around the block in a company that basically helped invent the industry, but watched that same company that was running it down to basically don't do anything in the industry anymore. So you've gone from someone that invented the industry to actually losing all of its market share, mostly all of its business. With that, I got into a supply chain role simply because we were in the struggles of bringing a new product to market, and we got delays and delays and delays. And then finally, when we got the product ready and technically approved, we had a supply chain issue with something. And my big mouth got me into trouble. So eventually I said, well, why don't we put you in supply chain? And from there, right, it's been a learning experience ever since.
Wow, that's fantastic. And yes, for those of us that know, have a few years on it, Motorola was the OG of the cell phone. And then, yeah, it's so true. Just like the other chain stores, what's Blockbuster, Kmart, things like that. If you don't innovate and you don't make sure that your product is running properly and you have the supply chains to continue, you're gonna fail miserably. But thanks for sharing and reminding us of those ugly big old bag phones and the brick phone that was so 80s. That's terribly funny. I do remember that. Okay, so this is a perfect time of the year for us to really think about how we're going to project what next year is going to look like. And with so many people working on their plans right now, and you should be working on your plans right now if you haven't finished them already, this is a great topic to come in because you talk about forecasting and the challenges with the supply chains and how you can improve the results of your forecasting through your book. So
Mhm.
when we talk about forecasting, let's do a little basics here. When we're talking about forecasting, what are we really doing?
So when you're looking at forecasting and to simplify the whole process, forecasting is forecasting your demand, which basically says what is your current order book and what is your expected order book. The two add up together, that is your demand forecast. So if you simplify from that perspective, when you're forecasting your demand. And then when you forecast your business, then you have to understand what constraints to that demand that you're looking to forecasting to come up with what your overall operating plan is going to look like for the year.
I love that. And it could be very simplified on a high level, but you really truly need to understand, as you mentioned, the demand of
Sure.
your product or service. And there are similarities to both. So when we're forecasting our demand, how do we do that? How do we find out how many customers or guess how many customers are going to buy from us through the next year?
Yeah. So that is the $20,000 question.
The
So,
$1 million question.
but yes, so you look at that. You know, demand has many elements to it. In the short term, you're really managing an order book, what the orders that you're bringing on based on the lead times you're dealing with. That is basically your order book. And then it comes into the chaos of moving that order book in and out, depending on your customers. Then longer term, depend on many other factors, your new product launch cycles, what's going to happen in the social economic environment that we're dealing with
The R
your
word, right?
yeah, with your particular customers. I mean, how profitable can they be, or what is their potential order book? So there are many variables that have to
Mm,
go into play in how you're forecasting. Where a lot of companies get upside down is that you're not aligned as to what you're planning for, what you forecast for, and then many biases get into the forecast that eventually drive your suppliers, your capacity planning, your need for how many personnel you need as you
mm.
look down the line here. And if you're greatly wrong, you could basically have a very negative impact on your business.
And that wrong side could be too much product or people or inventory, and then
Yeah,
the other side is not enough product, people, or inventory. So
right.
it is a balance on there.
Yes.
And thank you for there are so many nuances that come into projecting, and I know a lot of people just come in, especially newer companies. They go, well, we did 300,000 in sales last year, so we're going to do 400,000 in sales this year, with no rational value to it. They just guess. And I think that's where they have their problems. And there are those nuances that they have to look at to be able to accurately forecast what they're going to need and have on hand so that, and even marketing and salespeople and customer support after the sale, all those pieces are so important. And you got to have that number right.
Well, I'll just gonna put it, you'll never be right. Right. So uh,
But close enough, right?
yeah, you'll never be right in your forecast, hence what you're dealing with the forecast. But what you want to do is take out the big variables that could cause your forecast to be grossly wrong. Or if you are going to put a risk part in your forecasting to drive it, you got to make sure that then there's a plan. What are you going to do to recover, and not wait for the fly to hit the windshield, so to speak, before you recover the plan. But it's really trying to align your company on, hey, really, what are the assumptions we're putting in the forecast? Are those good assumptions? Yes or no? Right? And you can align around those assumptions and then you can create those forecasts. But you're not going to cover every single variable. You're not going to know everything for sure. But it really comes down to is what biases get into your forecast and do you want to remove them? Or if you're going to put, I'll call it a risk forecast in, or something that's going to be uh, a big if it doesn't come to fruition, come into a big problem for the company, what are your plans then to mitigate that risk? Do it up
Mm,
front and not do it by when you get there, because
got
that
it.
nothing
You
you can
know,
do about it.
absolutely. You can't just put a plan in place and go, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
You have to reevaluate it and constantly touch it. It's kind of, I always use the terminology like sailing, you're always adjusting the sail to get the wind in the right direction. Then you adjust it that way and then you adjust it that way. Um, but you mentioned something here. You said that there are biases. So give me some examples of what kind
Sure.
of biases that you've seen.
Sure. So, I mean, one from some of my experience is that um, when products are developed, and I've worked mostly with OEMs in the world, is that when you develop a product, to get that product approved, to say, hey, we're going to invest our dollars in there, right? You have a set of assumptions that go in. You get the product approved. You put engineering resources on it. You supply it, uh, and you develop a business plan for that.
Hmm.
Yet, as time moves on, your product's still not launched yet,
Mm.
but variables will change. And so I've had many instances where we had product management teams saying, no, this is what the business plan is. That was done 12, 18 months ago. Completely different set of assumptions. We still need to drive this into our forecast. We still need to drive making sure we got the supply base for it, the product for it. Yet, when you look at some of the incredible stuff, the market completely changed and is really no longer relevant, especially if your product plan was to plan at launching at one date and then it moved out 6, 8 months. Sorry, right? It's this the assumptions aren't changed, but you'll see that bias because the product manager, he or she, has to be their living is launching their product and driving it. So sometimes you run into what we call a parent effect. Is like when you come to the forecast side, you have it's like a parents judging a beauty contest for their kids in there, right? Very, very biased onto what beauty necessarily looks like and not necessarily as objective.
Well said, well said. So that's interesting. So when you're developing a product line, it takes a while to get to market. Market changes, timelines change, launch dates change, functionality of the product you're creating, or even the supply chain, as we've talked about. If y'all remember a few years ago with that little chip in the car, it caused a crazy market for used cars because they couldn't get new cars produced.
Mhm.
So these kind of changes do happen and you have to plan and adjust for them. So I like the way that you explain that. What about if we're dealing with smaller companies and the supply chain isn't quite so large? You're not OEM kind of building out a new product, but you're delivering consistently. You still need to project and forecast what you're
Sure.
going to do. And some of those things, as you mentioned from the introduction, that you have a lot of that sales experience. So, how do you forecast the sales on an existing product? Is there any magic to that?
Sure. Sometimes, depending on the size and where you are in the supply chain, some of the entrepreneur side may be getting into an OEM anyhow. Maybe indirectly that you're a third or fourth tier supplier getting into an OEM. And if you look at from that perspective, your customer forecast, which is generally the worst forecast you can use, in my experience, trickles down to the tier two supplier, to the tier three supplier, trickle out to tier four supplier. By that time, it's way wrong, right? That when it comes down into the tier four. So if you're dealing with eventually your end product, where are we going to? I think when it comes down to if you are a little more vertically integrated in how you're going to market, you've got to align on what is the reality of the assumptions that you're aligning on. And if, especially when entrepreneurial companies are starting out, you don't have a broad portfolio. You're dealing
Mm.
with one, two, three products, or maybe services that you're going to manage to. What are those key variables that are going to make your product successful? Is it price? Is it actually quality? Is it going to be channels that you're going to have available to you for market? Is it we're going to put a lot of marketing investment or promotions in there? There's many various you have to align on to say, okay, this is how we project. But the key is to align your company on those assumptions and then develop the plan instead of developing the plan without any assumptions, saying, because it feels good, right? Well, that's
Yes.
great. It feels good. You got a plan, but how many? What's the small businesses? What's the success rate? Is it like
Oh,
10%?
it's horrific,
Yeah,
horrific. Yes, it's very hard for small businesses because they, I've said this at least 100 times. Many business owners start a business because they know their jam, right? They've got a widget or they've got a product or service that they like to do, and they're good at it. So then they wrap a business around it, rather thinking that this is a business, not you.
yeah.
And that's where the problem comes in, is just because they know how to do something doesn't mean you can, support a business around it.
And
I
typically,
think
they're geniuses when it comes down to
to
what they have to offer. I mean, that's the amount of what they bring is there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of brain and
100%.
science behind it. But
But the
then you
business
can't tell it.
structure around it is
Right,
not built
right,
properly. They start on the fifth floor instead of the foundation,
right.
which is always a challenge with the entrepreneurial world. And I like the way you put that in a fact of saying, you've got to understand what lane you're in, right? What tier you're in. What are the assumptions that are coming true that you can prove? Whereas a lot of folks will come in and say, "Oh, we're going this way," like you said, and put the plan in before the assumptions are validated. They'll put the plan in place, and you're like, well, wait a minute, how are we going to do this?
Right.
So they go from top to bottom rather bottom to top. Um, I think that's the correct direction.
Yeah.
But I think it's always a challenge for them, and I love the way that you focus on the details first. How are
Yeah.
we going to do this? What's going to get in our way? What are the potential risks? What is it going to cost us to build or produce this
Right.
product or widget or service, and how do we get that and do, let's go back
Exactly.
to square one, does the customer want it?
It's amazing to me as I learn myself, as I continue to learn, is that your once a year plan, right? It shouldn't be planned as an event. It should be planned as a process. And so
Yeah.
with that, sales and operations planning is to realign and adjust to your plans every month. So
Yes.
what are the assumptions that are changed? What does that mean? How are you going to react with your supply base? How are you going to react to your customer base? What are you going to do to manage those variables? And I've
Yeah.
seen many times, even not even large companies, relatively small companies, you got a marketing arm completely on their own making decisions, right, with no clue of what effect that would have on your particular supply chain. So if you create a
Yeah.
big marketing campaign, I can't tell how many times I run into the issue of like, yeah, we have this big marketing campaign, right? We got all these orders and we're like,
And we
where did
can't fill them.
this come from? Right? We can't fill them. Where did this go? We didn't align, right? And so it's kind
Yeah.
of a simple of that. And you need to me, it comes down to is, bringing the right leadership and recognition in place that these things that are going to impact sales, the variables need to be aligned, need
So
to
true.
definitely be aligned.
So true. And I love the idea that the plan is not an event, right? You have Well, I like to have, so I'm big on planning. I'm a certified financial planner. That's always been my jam. How do I engineer it and create it? But I believe that plan requires prime real estate on your desk, right? Or on your computer, that it's reviewed frequently to adjust for variables that come in, because like you said, there could be large demand, or you could have a cyclical market, right? Having those steady adjustments to your plan so you can succeed in the plan is so important, because if you're forecasting, oh, I'm going to make $1 million or $1 billion this year, well, what did you make last year? Right? How far of a stretch are you making this? And does it make sense? Do you have the people, the processes, and the products in place to be able to deliver on that goal?
And
Yes.
what also is one of the things that it's very hard to do is we read news, we read social media, and what we've never experienced, probably in our lifetimes, is the pandemic we just got through.
Ugh.
We have just
And
gone
then
through
followed
that.
by now the incoming, if we're not already there, recession period, right?
Yep.
So
So
the
you look,
pandemic was horrible.
well, if you look at that, but you kind of let's step back, right? So you hear all the pandemic, we got to watch our cash flow, we got to shut down our business, we just got to manage the inventories. And at the same time, workers aren't coming to the office, so we're not communicating with our supply base yet, right? Yet, okay. Look at 2021. How many companies produce record revenue? How many companies produce record profit? Okay. So the plant, you get into there. Yes, there's tons of supply chain issues out there, but relative to the entire business, many of them produce record revenue, record profits, but it's still not good enough. And so
Right.
I always call it you know how to create demand very easily?
Yeah.
Say there's a shortage. Then
The
this
fear,
demand comes
right?
out of nowhere. And what you're going to see is now that supply chain issues are evaporating, I call it
Toilet
truth.
paper.
Yeah,
Toilet paper.
truth in the order book, right? Everyone
Ugh.
extended their lead times. Everyone came in. Many companies can't predict what they need 48 weeks from now, let
Mm,
alone 3 weeks from now. So you
yeah.
look at this, and so you're going to see this element where we're going to go into a recessionary period. Will have an effect, right? Will have
Sure.
an effect on demand, but at the same time, that order book that was put in 30 weeks ago, 40 weeks ago, is no longer valid. So just be very aware. Even though you have an order book for it, does not mean it's real.
Mm. I like that because it is really important to be able to, you know, come out of situations, plan for situations, right? Nobody planned for the pandemic. I mean, that hit us like a ton of bricks. But like you said, there were many companies that had record years because they were fluid. They could see and adjust quickly. They had supply or they had demand. And then they put, the fear came in, toilet paper, walking through the grocery store and everything's empty for no reason, right? Um, but I think that companies need to be fluid and they need to have those backup plans in place. And I think in forecasting, we can forecast potential troubles coming our way and have a plan B or an emergency or a structure in place that could
Yeah.
handle that.
But I call it is that what we've seen in this case, most companies plan for a modest growth from 2020 to 2021. Modest growth, 8%, 7%. Yet they're hitting 40% record higher revenues, but still have many, many supply chain shortages. Why? A lot of that's influenced by, hey, we got increased lead times, we got issues. Your customers don't know, not necessarily know, so then they're going to throw a bunch of orders on you, knowing that when it comes time to the where the rubber hits the road, they may or may not need it because they don't know what other shortage is going to cause their issues, right? So
So panic buying, right?
yeah,
Or
yeah.
panic
So
ordering.
you're going to have a piece of that in there as well. And man, try to convince sales that the order books panic buy. Oh,
Right. Not gonna happen.
no.
Not gonna happen.
But with facts and data,
Yeah.
you can, right? And just put it through it. But then it comes down to basically facing the issues head on and then coming back to the point of that's why S&OP is a process and
Mm.
not an event. But if we didn't learn anything out of 2021, then you're not doing your job.
Whew, that is an understatement right there. We do need to learn from the evolving markets that come in. And we've gone through 2020, which shut the world down. Then we come into 2021 where we're opening it up and the panic buying and everything comes in. And then now we had a modest 2022 now that the recessionary fears are coming in and we're heading into 2023, these are important factors that we need to, as business owners, to be fluid enough to adjust and forecast and prepare for things and have the right systems and processes in place to be able to move with the flow, speed up, slow down, adjust the right, adjust the left, and have a little bit of structure in place that will allow you to do that.
And to me, then it comes back down to is always test your assumptions and then always test those assumptions every time. Is this right still, or is this got to modify? And then what are the variables you need to add to your assumptions? So it's just because you had these assumptions, there may be another variable you didn't consider, bring that into the fold, continuous learning, and eventually you become smarter than the rest.
Ah, love it, love it. And those assumptions can be people, product, they can be consumer, they can be inflationary or things that you can't control, right? So it's understanding those movements in there, and I love it that you're retesting them.
Mhm.
So one more quick question for you: how often should you retest?
Well, to me, is the sales and operations planning process itself. I think it's a fantastic process. It just basically is a monthly process that covers, let's test our product roadmap. Where are we? Let's then put a demand. So what does that look like around our
Love it.
roadmap or service that we're providing? What's the supply constraints? What's the operating plan, and how does that look to plan? And so it's a process you got to test, but every time, monthly, you got to retest those assumptions. And I think
Monthly.
and then from a quarterly basis, at least, just make sure you're doubling down on what assumptions, like a lessons learned. So I call it,
Mm-hmm.
the forecasts are, again, always wrong in nature, right? And you can measure forecast accuracy and all the analytics in it. But the key is not just to measure it, pray to it. What are the assumptions that you missed, right? Learn from it. And then how do you adjust? And when that
Mm-hmm.
continuous learning goes back in, you will become smarter than your competition. I promise that.
Love it. Love it. And that is so important, to be fluid and evolve and test. And then your forecasting will be more accurate. Not
Yeah.
100%, but you know
I,
what, if you can get 80 or 90, that's great.
I call it that your forecasting will be less bad. So
Less bad. Oh, fantastic. Okay, John, where can listeners find out more about this method and your ideas? Because they are so important for today's market. And every business owner needs to be forecasting better, less bad, and using the abilities of the sales and operation process.
sure. So two things you can look up on my website at johnminkconsulting.com. But we also have a book that I've obviously published on really the art around the science of planning that you
Hmm.
can pick up on any online retail store, Amazon.com, Target.com, Walmart.com. So any online worldwide retailer, you can find the book.
I love it. I love it. And it's so important as business owners and leaders in our company to be able to know what we're doing for the next year, not just for our own growth potential, but for financing, for hiring, for ordering products and services that we need to have to fulfill our orders. There's so much around it. And business owners, if you're not forecasting properly and have all the knowledge and data that you can get a hold of, then you're only hurting your potential for succeeding in your company. Wow. Big important topic for today. I think it was super valuable. Listeners, I hope you found a couple ideas to put into your business that will help you become more profitable. And really, truly, forecasting is a big part of it. So don't forget that it is important to focus on growing your business and its revenue. Again, I'm looking for a few business owners to interview about my book's 12 strategies and how it would impact your industry. Please go download my book and let me know if you'd like to be interviewed. It's available for free for the next few weeks. And you can get these strategies, and they can help any business to increase their revenue, profit, and value of the company, without paying for additional advertising or marketing. Go pick up a copy of my book at trajectoryprofits.com/book-download. All right, John and I would love to hear your questions or comments. Share with us how maybe something you've done was very successful in your company based on the forecasting, or maybe share with us something that was a roadblock that you didn't anticipate. Put it in the comments here, and John and I will comment back on it. And while you're at it, subscribe to the show. We'd love to have you on the next podcast. Or listening for the next podcast. And as always, you can catch Profit with a Plan on any of your favorite podcast players. We're looking forward to more great profitable information on next week's show. So until then, make your plans and profit with them. Thanks so much, John.